Tonight's video is different. For the next hour, you're going to hear some of the most unsettling true stories ever posted on Reddit. Stories of people who vanished without a trace, of kidnappings that could have ended much worse, of criminals who chose the wrong victim, of strange encounters in empty roads, forests and dark rooms, and moments where something or someone was watching when they shouldn't have been. These aren't fictional tales. These happened. So turn your volume up and let's dive into Reddit's most disturbing stories. Let's start with our first set of stories, the crime and near murder encounters. All right, here's our first story. It comes from someone who was working at an off-campus student residence during Christmas break, and what they witnessed that night was something they never expected. Was working in the off-campus residences at my university. Over Christmas break, when most of the students had gone home, I was still there keeping an eye on the place. I was in my little office that was in one of the apartment blocks when I heard a pop, 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 pop power noise. It really just sounded like some kids were letting of some small fireworks in the stairwell or something. I looked out of my office window, which was just outside of the bottom of the stairwell, facing south, to see if I could see what was up. As I looked out, 3 to 4 dudes come running down the stairs and take off running to the east toward the complex entrance. About 10 seconds later, another dude comes down the stairs and slowly walks off toward the southwest. I went outside to check and see if what damage had been caused by the fireworks and went up the stairwell. As I got to the top, there was no fireworks debris or smoke or anything, but I saw a cell phone lying on the ground and a single small hole in the wall outside the door of one of the units. At the other end of the corridor, there was another stairwell, and at the bottom of that, there was an old beater car just idling with the headlights on and a few of the doors just hanging open. Something was definitely fishy about it. I definitely had the "what if those were gunshots" thought, but there was no gunpowder smell or blood or anything besides that one little hole. To play it safe, I called the cops, who said they were sending someone over. The station is very close to the housing complex, and they were there in less than a minute. I gave them a quick summary of what I saw, and they split up to go in the directions I told them that the people had headed. It was less than 30 seconds later that they found the lone guy that had gone off to the southwest. Turns out he had been shot multiple times and had managed to walk across the parking area and turn behind a building before collapsing on the grass. They tried CPR, but when the ambulance arrived, the paramedics pronounced him dead on the scene. The other cops who had gone east did find the other guy and arrested them. I ended up having to go testify in court during the trial of the guy that was supposedly the shooter. I told them basically what I wrote up here, but didn't know any of the people involved and never saw faces or anything of any real help to the police. I think I was basically there to establish timeline or something like that. Anyhow, I heard that it was basically a drug deal gone wrong. 2 different gangs from 2 different counties thought the residents' apartments would be empty over the holidays and set up a deal. One party tried to rip off the other party and someone got shot. As I understand it, the shooter guy got sent to prison. Let's go on to the next one. This one is told by someone who was just 13 years old when their family got caught in the middle of a violent incident that changed everything. I've posted this as a comment on another Ask Reddit before, so copy-paste. Also, this was technically a homicide, but was ruled as self-defense. To add, I was 13-year-old female. My then 18-year-old brother and his then 18-year-old wife lived next door to a family with a teenage son. She started an affair with that 17-year-old son. One day, the son barged into my brother's place and started attacking him. I don't know exactly why, but the wife didn't seem to want to move away with my brother to the army or some dumb shit. My brother was packing and moving because he was leaving for the army. He had pulled down a metal pole in a closet to make room for boxes My brother grabbed that pole and used it to fight off the teen. The kid ran out bleeding. My brother called my dad. We lived a few blocks down the street, and my dad jumped into action. He grabbed one of his hunting shotguns and some bird ammo. He ran out the door to the car screaming for us to call 911. My mom and I ran after him because we were clueless and wanted to see where he was headed. My mom was on the phone with a cop, and they were dispatching the one cop that we had in our town. We start running down the road to my brother's place because we saw Dad pull in. As we get near, we hear a gunshot and see my dad and brother taking cover behind the car doors they'd opened to climb in and leave. Another shot goes off, and we can see it isn't my dad firing. The teen had run home next door and was bleeding and told his dad my brother was trying to kill him. His dad grabbed his handgun and saw my dad and brother leaving and started shooting. That's the gunfire Mom and I heard. Dummus kept running towards my dad's car. I saw my dad position his shotgun in the car window and fire one round. Then he and my brother climbed in the car and started driving back at us, our home. We all finally get together, and Dad says he shot the man in the stomach. Chaos breaks out on our street. Ambulance, cops, and people. They take the other dad away to the hospital and my dad into custody. Within hours, we find out that the man has died. The bird shot hit his liver and he bled out. Turns out he was an alcoholic, and his liver was not going to survive the trauma. My dad was charged with murder, and we started receiving death threats. In the cover of night, we are moved. We hid for days until my dad was bonded out, ended up moving far away. Grand jury was convened, and I had to testify to what I saw. After all the evidence and testimony was presented, my father wasn't charged. The grand jury decided it was self-defense. We never talk about what happened or anything. Things carry on as normal. That day is forever burned into my memory. I want to add this. My dad never recovered from taking a man's life, even though it wasn't intentional. He ended up hooked on heroin after the church couldn't save him. We lost him to his demons in 2008. My brother has done well for himself, but he had his own battles that he fights daily. I am not pro or anti-gun. I just wish this had never happened because so many lives were changed. My brother divorced her after he left for the army. She is gone from our lives forever. This post was shared a few years back, so let's get into it. So basically, this person was almost stabbed by a teenager during a lifeguard course. The instructor didn't believe them at first. Their friend ended up bleeding, and the attacker just disappeared. Wow, a serious post I can actually comment on. It wasn't a murder attempt, maybe it was, but a stabbing attempt, I guess. Happened when I was around 12 to 13 years old. I was taking a lifeguarding course at a local pool with a friend of mine, which had about 16 people in the class. The age ranges in the class can vary, and we probably had a mix of people between 12 and 18, but most were somewhere in the middle. There was this one kid, probably 16 to 17, that really stood out to me and my friend as the typical school shooter type. Very solemn look on his face at all times, socially awkward, and extremely quiet. We both got really strong serial killer vibes from him. It's just one of those instincts you feel that tells you something isn't right. We made a few jokes between ourselves about it, as we both noticed it almost immediately, and were fairly uncomfortable being around him. This lasted for probably the first 2 hours of the 4-hour class. At that point, we were asked to switch from pool instruction into a classroom, and had about 20 minutes to change and get into the classroom. As we are all changing, this guy kept looking over at me and my friend. We tried not to make eye contact with him and just ignore it, but we were getting extremely uncomfortable with how intensely the guy was staring. We were the only 3 in the change room and were intent on leaving as fast as possible. Eventually, my friend makes eye contact with the guy, who screams something along the lines of, "Stop looking at me," pulling a switchblade out of his swim bag and lunging at my friend. I stood there, somewhat frozen as this was happening, and didn't really know what to do, whether to try and help or run. My friend ended up blocking the initial lunge with the locker door, and he sprinted towards the front exit of the change room with this enraged, knife-wielding teenager chasing him. When my friend had made it out of the change room, the maniac turned around and started chasing me down. With pool deck floors, they are extremely slippery and almost impossible to run on, but 12-year-old me wasn't exactly worried about that at this point. I had to run from the change room out locker area, through the bathrooms, through a shower room, and then onto the pool deck, the only other exit. All I remember is him catching up to me, and he must have been within reach at some point on this 100-meter run. But I remember turning around once I made it on the pool deck, and the guy was gone. I was half-dressed and basically still sprinting towards the lifeguard office. Once there, I found our instructor and told him what happened. So when he didn't believe me, he said I was lying and was just picking on the kid, nothing happened, etc. So I told him to try and find my friend with me. I was panicking, hyperventilating, but apparently not believable. My friend was still out in the lobby now with a ton of concerned parents around, trying to figure out what was going. Turns out when he blocked the knife with the locker door, the knife got his forearm, and he was bleeding pretty badly. Not arterial, but probably a 6-inch gash on the hairy part of your arm. Immediately, my instructor ushered us away and called the police. Building went into lockdown, etc. To this day, I have no idea what happened to that kid. He never came back to the class, and the police didn't find him that night. I'm assuming he got arrested, but I never heard about it. It was probably the closest I ever came to getting killed, and I'm not exactly sure why, how he didn't stab me, or if he slipped and fell before making it to me. He was considerably larger than me and definitely faster. All I know now is I should trust my instincts more with people. They might turn out to be true. All right, let's jump into our next story. This one comes from someone who was volunteering in Central America. The guy thought 2 strangers were just acting friendly, but one of them was known for pretending to hug people before stabbing them. He was literally seconds away from being killed. I was doing volunteer work in Central America, working in a really bad area of the capital city. It was a slum built on top of the city's garbage dump. The whole place reeked of trash, and there were large metal cylinders coming up out of the ground throughout the area to vent the gas from decomposing garbage underground. As a fellow volunteer, and I walked down a dirt path, 2 men approached us. I'd never seen them before. They were acting strangely, but I just thought they were drunk or high. A lot of people in the area drank rubbing alcohol to get drunk since it was cheaper than beer or liquor. Over time, drinking the rubbing alcohol would really mess with their brains. As the men got closer, they began acting really friendly, too friendly. One of them came close to me, trying to put his arm around my shoulders. At first, it seemed like the behavior of a guy who gets happy and friendly when he's drunk. However, an alarm went off in my head, and I gently, but firmly, pushed him away. I tried to make it seem lighthearted and playful, like, "Hey man, how's it going?" Affectionate shove. I didn't want to make a scene since I was a gringo. I didn't want to seem like an ugly American. This went on over and over down the whole path. He'd get close. I'd shove him off. He'd come close again. Finally, my friend and I came to a fork in the path, and we went one way while they went another. After we got to the house of some people we knew, we told them about the 2 guys. I was so focused on protecting myself, I didn't even notice much of what was happening with the other guy. They said, "Oh, everyone around here knows him. That's his routine. He comes up to people, pretends to be friendly, puts an arm around them, then pulls out his knife and stabs them in the stomach." I was that close to getting stabbed to death. All right, moving on. This next story is another real-life crime encounter, And honestly, it's one of the creepiest stalking experiences I've ever read. Let's get into it. I was working at a local grocery store as an assistant customer service associate. I would work early mornings and late nights, closing and opening the store. One night, I was closing the store, and it was about an hour to an hour and a half before closing time. Around this time, I typically send one of my cashiers to go get carts while I collect registers, but this night we were busy and I was stuck on a register. So my manager went out to get carts to help me while I was on a register. When he was out there, he asked me on my headset if my boyfriend would have left me roses on my car. In response to that, I told him no, because the guy I was dating at the time was at home and didn't have a car. He told me, that's weird. You have a stuffed animal rose in your car door handle, and it has a weird smiley face written on the tag. It must be one of your stalkers, he said jokingly. But I was wondering who could have left me that. So when it slowed down, my manager and I watched footage on the security cameras, and we see a car back into the space next to mine, roll down its window, and stick the plush rose into my door handle and speed off. I didn't recognize the car, so my manager told me he would walk me to my car when we left. He walked me to my car, and I started driving down the road. I got a call from him about 1 minute later, where he sounded frantic, saying that the guy who stuck the rose in my handle was waiting in a parking lot across the street and went through our grocery parking lot going about 85 trying to catch up to me, and that I was most likely being followed, which is also when my phone died and I didn't have a charger in my car. I live in a rural country area, and hardly ever is anyone behind me. By the time I get to my roads to get to my house, I looked behind me, and sure enough, someone was following me at a strange distance. So I knew there was an abandoned gas station a little ways down the street. So I told myself I'd do a U, turn around it, and see if the person followed and see if it was the same car. I went around the abandoned pumps, and what do you know, it is the same car, and he follows me around the pumps too. At this point, I want to cry, and I'm in a panic. There aren't any police stations nearby. My phone is cut off. So I go about 125 down a windy back road until I can't see him behind me anymore, pull off into some random road, pull into a stranger's house, and cut my lights off and wait there for about an hour. I called the cops when I got home, and none of them took me seriously and said they wouldn't have been able to do anything about the situation because the person hadn't touched me. A couple weeks pass, and I am out and about to get something for my friend from work's baby shower. I'm at Babies R Us, and I ran inside and left my window a crack down in my Jeep because I knew I'd only be inside for a minute. Before I went in, I looked at my ID and thought that I might want to grab it because I was going to be using a credit card and they might want to see it, but I thought to myself, if they need it, I'll come back out. Turns out they did need it. So I went out to my car and my license is gone. And I am very confused. I am an airhead and tend to misplace things, but I knew I had seen it before I had gotten out of the car. I thought I had gone mad. I brushed it off and just used my debit card instead, and honestly kind of forgot about my ID and ordered a new one thinking the old one would turn up. Fast forward about 2 days, I had 2 cops show up at my door. When I answered, they asked me if I was first, middle, last name, and I said yes, and they said, "Thank God, we thought you were dead in a ditch somewhere." At that point, I was very confused, and they told me that they had arrested a man in so-and-so county under some pretty extreme charges, and that he had my license and a bunch of photos of me and random stuff of mine on him and in his car during the arrest. I swear I lost all color in my face. They gave me their numbers and said my stuff would be coming in the mail with a deportation officer's number and to give them a call if anything new happens or if I have any questions. I don't know what that guy's intentions were, what he would have done if he had followed me home that night and I hadn't noticed, or how long he had been watching me for or following me. but I am so thankful that nothing happened. It wasn't for another month or so of digging that I found out who it had been who had followed me. It was some guy in his late 20s that came into my store often. He'd only ever buy Coronas and Newport cigarettes, and he barely spoke English. He always gave me the heebie-jeebies. He had actually come into the store earlier that night. I just didn't know he drove that car. I think about this night month all the time. All right, with that chilling encounter, let's move on to our next story. And this one is a completely different kind of nightmare. It's a true crime case shared by someone in law enforcement, and it is honestly one of the darkest, most disturbing cases they've ever heard. So, let's get into it. My cases have so far been relatively uninteresting by true crime standards, but I did hear one once when I went out of state for a training. Two guys, we'll call them Bob and Tom, had federal government jobs and worked in Ohio. Bob is a few years older than Tom, but they both started their careers there together, so they became friends. They stayed there in Ohio a couple years before getting transferred out to Nevada. After working there in Nevada for some time, Tom meets Jane, who also works with them. The two fall madly in love and get married. Bob is even in their wedding party. Well, Tom and Jane decided Nevada wasn't for them, so they requested a transfer to Florida. They get the transfer, and Tom tells Bob the great news about the transfer. Bob doesn't want to be left out, though, so he also puts in for a transfer to Florida. Tom and Jane get out there to Florida and buy a house. Bob gets himself a condo. After a couple years, Tom and Jane decide that they want to build their dream house, but they can't seem to sell theirs. Bob, always having been a good friend to Tom, and Jane offers to buy their house so they can get out. They sell it to Bob, build their dream house, and move in. They live there a while. Bob comes over and spends time hanging out with them sometimes. It's a good life. Well, one day, Jane is leaving the house to go to the grocery store to get food for dinner. As she's getting into her car, Bob drives up. "Oh, hey, Bob. I didn't know you were coming by to see Tom. I'll grab some more food and set another spot for dinner." "Oh, thanks, Jane. I won't take too long, though. Just going to be in and out." "Oh, okay. Well, have a good one." Jane leaves and goes to the store. Bob goes inside. When Jane returns, she sees a few drops of blood leading from the door. It wasn't much at all, though, so it doesn't strike her as too suspicious. She goes inside and finds a pile of Tom's clothing on the floor, a few drops of blood, and 2.22 Magnum shell casings nearby. She calls the police, and they show up and ask when she last saw Tom. She told them when she had left the house to go to the store. Bob had come over to say hi, and that was time she saw him. They say, "Okay, since Bob was probably the last person we know saw him, can we get Bob's number?" She gives it to them, but Bob doesn't answer when they call. "Okay, Miss Jane, he's not answering. Do you know his address?" "Oh, yeah, of course. He bought our old house." Jane gives them the address, and police go do a welfare check on Bob. All the window blinds are shut. All the doors are locked. No one came to the door. No reasonable suspicion to enter Bob's house, though. Sometime later, can't remember, but I think it was a couple days, Jane finds a note in the house and hands it over to police. The note is from Bob, addressed to Tom. The contents of the note basically say, "Tom, I'm straight and have been with women, but not for many years. I had some experiences with a couple guys, but that was a long time ago. I'm definitely not gay because that's a sin, but I'm in love with you since we first met. I'm so jealous of Jane being allowed to touch your naked body. I've come here today to ask to suck on your manhood, but I'm too shy to tell you directly, so I wrote this note to give to you to read. I'm not leaving until I suck your cock." The police head back over to Bob's house, and at this point, they smell something. They make entry, also got a warrant, and find a mountain, 5 feet high, of used tissues and a mound of empty lotion bottles in the bathroom. The house has almost no furniture, save in the bedroom, and nothing on the walls. Pretty gross house to my recollection. They go in one of the bedrooms and find Tom's body on the floor, naked, 2 shots in the head, and his genitalia sliced off with a box cutter, a hole where his dick had been. Bob is laying on the bed in an adjacent room with a hole with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his head, staring at Tom's corpse. Autopsy of Tom would later find semen in the hole where he genitalia had been. As you likely have figured out, Bob came over to Tom's house to proposition him. When Tom said no, he pulled out a recently purchased .22 pistol and forced him to undress. When Tom still wouldn't cooperate with Bob's sick fantasy, Bob popped him in the head twice, dragged Tom's body over to his car, propped it up on the passenger's seat, and drove it back to his house. Bob got there and realized he couldn't really give Tom a blowy anymore as he was dead, so he improvised and found another way to pleasure himself with Tom. The pathologist estimated he improvised at least 3 times. When he had finished using Tom's corpse, he laid down on his bed and killed himself. Bob was not immediate suspect due to Jane's insistence on his close relationship to them. I may have gotten a few details wrong, as it's been a while since I reviewed that case, but that is the gist of the most interesting case I've heard. Damn, man, this one is seriously messed up. Imagine thinking someone is your close friend for years, moving states together, working together, and then finding out they were hiding something this dark the whole time. The betrayal, the obsession, the way everything escalated out of nowhere. That's the kind of crime story that really sticks with you. All right, now let's move into our next category: weird and unsettling experiences with strangers. These are those moments where someone you've never met suddenly acts strange, gets too close, or gives off a vibe that something isn't right. Not exactly criminal, but definitely creepy enough to stay in your mind. All right, let's get into the first one. I was pregnant with my first child in 2001. Right before my due date, I was obviously really pregnant. I was shopping in Walmart, and I started to notice this woman on every aisle I went on. I would guess she was in her mid-30s. When I went to the baby section to look at clothes, she started asking me questions. At first, they were common, like about the gender. Then the questions started getting strange. Was I married? Did we have a house or an apartment? She commented on my accent and was curious if we had anyone in the area. I am from Michigan and was stationed in Florida, visiting for the birth. Just kind of odd. I was young, 20, but I was married. And my husband and I were both active duty, living off base in a rental house. I just told her yes, we were excited, and to have a good rest of her day. She then started actually following me, telling me her husband was outside the store and they could help me take my groceries to my house. That's when I got really nervous. I told her I was fine, thanks, that my husband was home and could help me. She then told me they had a big truck and that she would buy me a large baby item. I politely declined, and she was so insistent, becoming aggressive. She then offered to buy my husband a grill since we didn't need any baby things. I was getting panicky at this point because I knew this lady was not right. I went to check out, so did she. She got out before me, and I watched her race walk out of the store. And sure enough, she and her husband were pulled along the curb at the front near the pop machines. They were in a beat-up old yellow box truck. Husband rolls it down the window and says, "We'd be happy to help you with that." I again declined and went to my car. Loaded up and watched for a minute. They didn't move, just watched me. As soon as I pulled out, they did too. I hauled ass out of there, and they were only behind me for a minute or two. I still drove around crying for about 30 minutes, making sure they were gone before I had to pee and needed to go home. I'm now 44, and that is the first and one of just a few times that I have felt that level of fear in my life. That's really terrifying. All right, let's move on to the next unsettling encounter. Story time. I'm going to try to get into the detail, paint a picture. I was walking back home along the beachfront after being out with the girls at about 11 p.m. I think I was about 17 at the time. It was 35 degrees in the middle of August, absolutely boiling, so I was just wearing denim shorts and a barely there top. No part of me felt anxious or worried. I lived in a small, safe country with barely any reported crime. This was about 2008 to 2009, so social media wasn't prolific either. I turn into one of the narrow roads away from the beachfront, and it's just pitch black minus some faraway lights from street lamps. I could see the silhouette of a man in the distance getting out of a car and approaching me. I did feel a little nervous, but about 5 seconds later I could clearly see that it was a police car with the blue lights, so felt instantly relieved. He approaches me and asks me if I saw two men running down the street. I tell him sorry, didn't see anything. He looks around, visibly concerned, tells me the two men were accused of sexual assault and that he couldn't possibly allow me to walk home by myself. He then gestures for me to get in his car so he can take me home. At this point, I'm just thanking my guardian angel for sending this hero my way to protect me. It was definitely a police car. He had the badge. He wore the uniform. All good. I feel super safe. He asked my name, makes some small talk, and pretty soon I've revealed that my dad is away. I don't have a brother, and I don't have a boyfriend. People don't ask these questions in an obviously creepy way. It's never, hey, little girl, where's your daddy? It's more like, I can't believe you're walking home alone. Why doesn't your dad pick you up, or your brother? Oh, I see, no boyfriend either. Then it's the, you must have a lot of boys after you. Oh, you're only 17. You seem very mature for your age. Then comes the, you're going to break so many hearts and you will turn into a beautiful woman. At this point, I'm not so comfortable anymore, so I ask him to drop me off a couple streets away from my house. He stops the car and just turns his body towards me. Tells me, doesn't ask, tells me to give him my number because he wants to message me on weekends and make sure I'm not walking home alone again. I give him my number without hesitation because I'd much rather block him afterwards than risk a confrontation at this point. He's nonchalantly touching my thigh as he speaks, my face moving my hair behind my ear. Not a lingering touch, but still. The thing is, no part of me thought he'd rape me or go any further. I had no doubt in my mind that he was a policeman. I had no doubt in my mind that this wasn't legally questionable. I just felt like some men like younger girls. You're wearing skimpy clothes, you're being nice to him. He probably thinks you're interested. It's a bit creepy, and I want to go home, but I'm not in danger. I'm just uncomfortable. And then it took a weird turn. He asked me if I've ever held a gun. I obviously hadn't ever seen one in real life, and hadn't ever known anyone who had a gun. He then takes his gun out and tells me to hold it. I didn't think he was going to shoot me, like not for a second. But I suddenly saw a gun for the first time in a confined space, and I felt terrified. I had this intrusive thought that it would go off by accident, and I could just imagine blood splatters all over the car windows. I ask him to please put it away. He insists that I hold it. This back and forth goes on for a few seconds, and I'm like, fuck it. I take the gun and just hold it. My heart is beating out of my chest, and he's looking at me, touching my hair, and moving it out of my face. He's not saying anything, just looking at me. I decide to play his game and just do whatever, as long as it gets me out of his car. So I tell him to hold the gun because I think he'd look really cool with it. Immediately, he takes that gun, holds it, runs it down my thigh. I tell him I like how it feels, internally vomiting, but I keep a straight face. The whole time I feel like this is on me. Somewhere along this drive, I fucked up, I said something wrong, and now here we are. I tell him it's almost midnight, and I have a curfew. My mom will get mad, so I have to go home. I try to open the car door, but it's locked. In a very jokey way, he's like, no, I don't want to let you go. I've only just found you. Me, I know my mom sucks, blah, 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 but I have to go or else I'll be grounded and I won't be allowed to go anywhere for a month. He leans in. I do the shy little face turn. He puts his hand on my face and just gives me a long, lingering kiss on the cheek, kisses my hand a few times. The whole time he's breathing so heavy. I'm keeping the shy smile on. He unlocks the car, tells me he'll see me tomorrow, and I'm like, yes, of course. I get out of his car, turn the corner, and run. I don't know if he saw. He texted me pretty much straight away, I won't stop thinking about you until I see you again. I block, delete, never told my mom, never thought to report him. Just had this heavy feeling of guilt in my chest. Like if anyone found out, they'd judge me. Took a good 2 to 3 years to look back at that and realize how stupid I was to have felt guilty. I'd changed my phone by that time, but if I had his number, would have reported him to every authority imaginable. Okay, let's get into the next story. This encounter is about a date that went from awkward to seriously unsettling. I recently went on a date with a guy from my school who I met on a dating app. He seemed super sweet and charming over text, so I agreed to go on a date with him, especially after 2 friends told me they knew him from a class where he was a generally funny guy. We go to a small, pretty prestigious university, which also made me sure that he would be normal. He was supposed to meet me at 6 to go on a picnic, but ended up picking me up at 8:30. He texted me to reschedule to 8 and ended up showing at that time. He drove me to his apartment, and although uncomfortable, I agreed to go in because of everything I already knew about him. The apartment was only lit with 1 candle and a small glowing light on the floor, which didn't add much. It was a multiple bedroom apartment that he lived in alone, which made it even more odd. We talked and ate some food, and he seemed nervous and uneasy for most of it. He suddenly switched the conversation to our deepest, darkest secrets and asked if I'd ever seriously thought about killing anyone. After I said no, he made up a story about being in the Navy and having to bomb a ship and killing 5 people. When I was unsure how to respond, he sort of just passed it off as a joke and said that he had seriously thought about killing someone else, his ex's current boyfriend. I was extremely uncomfortable at this point and wanted to leave, and he agreed to drive me home. Before we left, he said he wanted to show something to me and pulled out a rifle that he pointed in my direction. When I got startled, he remained eerily calm and said he got it for hunting but couldn't think of even killing an animal. We left, and I got back to my friend's place safely. Everyone I've told has been flabbergasted about how the date went, and I can't shake the feeling that something was off about him, and it's creeping me out. And to clarify, I mean like something more sinister about him. Any thoughts on this would be appreciated. All right, that wraps up that one. Let's move on to the next story. We've reached our final category, and this one goes deeper than anything we've covered so far. This is the last chapter of a story that's unfolded piece by piece, and trust me, this part changes everything. If you've been following until now, take a breath, because what you're about to hear is the most intense update yet. I recently left my job as a deep sea diver. I worked for a large company that offers diving services ranging from salvage, underwater demolition, ship repairs, and search and recovery. They are a reputable company and are considered safe and reliable. So much so that they are often contracted by the government. Truth be told, I will miss working for them. The people I worked with were truly the best of the best. But there are only so many unexplainable things you can witness in the deep before you decide to stay out of the ocean forever. Here are some examples of the secrets many divers take to their graves. On the way to a job we were contracted to perform, our propeller became fouled. I suited up and prepared to make a quick dive to remove the fouling. I did a brief inspection and located thick line wrapped around the prop and shaft. I notified the supervisor, who then lowered a canvas bag with the tools I needed to cut it off. I hung the bag from the shaft and began freeing the propeller. It didn't take long, and I returned to my tool bag. I noticed a strange crunching sound when I dropped the tools in the bag. When I looked in the bag, it was full of large shells, many of which I had just crushed. After getting out of the water and stripping off my gear, I began examining them. The shells had what appeared to be hieroglyphics etched into them. I learned from one of the senior guys that this wasn't common, but had happened to several of them before. On one other occasion, we were recovering a military aircraft. When we arrived, naval ships were on scene waiting for us to recover it for them. We were quickly briefed that they had lost communication with the pilot and wanted us to recover it so that they could investigate. I was sitting comms and logs, communicate with divers, and monitor depth and bottom time when the divers reached the project. They reported that the plane was intact. We were all surprised. The supervisor asked how extensive the damage was, and they explained it was completely intact, as in there was no visible damage at all. It was just resting on bottom. Even stranger, the aircraft canopy was still in place. That means that the cockpit is still sealed. In other words, the pilot did not eject. But there was no sign of the pilot. We recovered the plane, and the military took custody of it. We never heard about it again. I witnessed another strange occurrence from topside at the location of a planned demolition. It's necessary to explain that one way you can keep track of a diver is to watch their bubble stream. When a diver inhales, the helmet's demand regulator provides air from their umbilical. Then when they exhale, it is exhausted into the water and floats up to the surface. On topside, you can watch the bubbles to get a general sense of where the divers are. Now on this occasion, we were hundreds of miles from land and had placed 2 divers in the water. About an hour into the dive, we started noticing something strange was happening. There were 3 distinct bubble streams coming from where they were working. At first, we assumed that there was a current and it was affecting them, but soon we noticed a 4th set of bubbles coming from a distance. It stopped about 20 feet from the divers near the other mysterious bubbles. We asked the divers, but neither could see anything out of the ordinary. Then, even from the surface, we heard a blood-curdling screech from the waters, then silence. The divers weren't too concerned. We hear strange things all the time. Sound travels well in the water, and you learn to assume it's a long distance away. But soon it looked like the water in the distance was boiling, and it was getting closer. It wasn't boiling, though. It was countless new bubble streams moving nearer to the location our divers were working. The supervisor ordered the divers to get onto the dive stage to be lifted back to surface. The bubbles were frighteningly close now, and the divers being lifted out said they had begun seeing shadowed figures in the distance. They couldn't quite make out what they were, though. We elected to pull the divers out without completing their decompression stops and throw them into our hyperbaric chamber. During another dive near the Bahamas, I had a frightening experience. It was my first salvage job with them, so I got in with a highly experienced diver. At just over 200 feet deep, we were examining the sunken vessel for rigging points. As I approached the bow of the ship, I noticed he was investigating a damaged portion of the hull. He swam a few feet into the ship, looking around. I asked him a few times if he wanted me to tend his umbilical air supply hose from just outside the ship. It's highly advisable since it's dangerous to enter a sunken ship, to which he stated no. He didn't want to enter the ship. He insisted he was on the port side of the ship. Assuming he was disoriented, I reached in to grab him. Just before touching him, I realized there were no bubbles coming from the helmet. Whatever this was, it wasn't breathing. I backed up and reported that something else was down here. I expected mockery, but there was none. The next thing I heard was the diving supervisor. Both divers, square yourselves away and get ready to leave bottom. When back on surface, I asked the supervisor about it. He said he refused to put his divers in exceptionally dangerous situations. He then refused to clarify. We declined to complete the salvage. I'm not entirely sure how to explain this next dive. I was on bottom, laying on my back, staring up toward the surface. All I could see were varying shades of darkness. Suddenly I came to my senses. I had no memory of how I got here. I realized I couldn't remember getting into the water or even why I was here. I tried to will my body to stand up, but realized I couldn't move. I couldn't control my body. Over the comms, I could hear Topside instructing the other diver to find me. How long had I been down here? How long had I been missing? He told Topside that they grabbed him. I tried to shout out, but I couldn't even do that. After a few frantic minutes of communication between the diver and Topside, I noticed a shadow growing clear. It was moving toward me. "Topside, I found him." He reached down and grabbed my harness to drag me back to our dive stage. As he pulled me, I rolled over and got a brief glance at my surroundings. I'd been laying in a pile of human bones. One of the strangest things I've ever witnessed happened on a body recovery mission. Even I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't been the one in the water. The military had found a site in which they believed the bodies of several missing World War II sailors would be found. I entered the water with another diver with body bags to carry the remains. On bottom, we eventually found 3 skeletons. We placed them in the bags and returned to the stage. On our return trip to the surface, we saw the bags begin to move, at first very slightly, then violently shaking and rolling. Bubbles escaped from 2 of the bags, and then they went still. The 3rd bag continued struggling. We reached surface and sat down on the deck, stripping our gear immediately. We were afraid to touch the bags, but one of the tenders eventually unzipped the moving bag. An old, frail, very alive man rolled out coughing water. We stood shocked, unable to comprehend what we were witnessing. Still not sure what I was doing, I ran to the other 2 bags and unzipped them. There were 2 more old men laying motionless in the bags. They appeared to have just drowned. We attempted CPR, but were unable to revive the men. The man, who was somehow now alive, was backing away from us, screaming of the horrors he'd witnessed. He screamed about an eternity spent burning. We locked him in a room and contacted the military that we had found a survivor. Within the hour, a military chopper was hovering over us to pick up the 2 bodies and the survivor. We had placed the bodies back in their bags and handed them over. The man bent over to inspect them, unzipping the bags. As he opened the bags, an unbearable stench overtook us. The bodies appeared to be in decay, as if they'd been dead and soaking in the water for a week. He zipped it back up and had them lifted into the chopper. Then we escorted him to the survivor. We could hear the screaming from down the hall. We opened the door and saw blood splattered on the walls. He was alive and screaming, but he too appeared to have started decaying. The man calmly walked him to the chopper, and the 2 of them were lifted on board. We never heard about them again. However, I went back and examined the room. With his blood, he had drawn hieroglyphics on the walls. I'm still not certain of what I viewed, but there were a few things that seemed to stand out: waves, flames, and bodies. There was a tremendous amount of them on the walls, but shortly after I walked in, our supervisor began scrubbing the walls. He refused to let us examine it any further. I've heard rumors about the keepers of the deep. I've wondered about them for quite some time. I believe they are the link between many of our stories. Their myth within our team is seldom spoken of, but here is what I gathered over the years. We are not meant to roam the depths of the ocean, and when a diver loses his life in the deep, it doesn't stay that way. They are cursed to forever roam the oceans, and when they find the living in an envious rage, they will bring you back to the depths from which they came. All right, and that was part 1. Now let's move into part 2, where things get even more unsettling. Before I share anything further, there are a few things I'd like to clarify. I received an astonishingly large amount of comments and personal messages since posting. Several people pointed out to me that there are probably very few people with experiences like these, and of those people, even fewer could say that they've recently left their job. Therefore, there are probably a lot of people out there who already know who I am, or that could figure it out easily. That being said, I still believe that everybody deserves to know. First, I'm going to answer some of the common questions I've received. Yes, I've experienced a lot of terrifying things in the ocean, but when you consider the amount of dives I've made, these experiences have truly been few and far between. Basic information about our dive gear. While it does vary based on the job, we do have a standard we typically use. We are hard hat divers, meaning we wear helmets, not scuba. It is surface supplied air. We have an air system on surface which runs through an umbilical down to the divers. The umbilical attaches to the helmet to supply the air. Woven in with the umbilical are our essentials. Without getting too technical, there is a line to supply air, electricity for a light, communications, and essentially a depth gauge. Additionally, we wear a tank on our back as an emergency gas supply. It doesn't contain much, though. Just enough to get to the surface in an emergency. We don't use rebreathers for the work we do. We do, however, occasionally use a full face mask instead of a helmet, or scuba if it is more practical, but it rarely is. The keepers of the deep. I've never found information about them online. The only people I've heard discuss them were the members of my team. I've been told other teams have had run-ins with them too, though. But even the guys on my team are hesitant to speak about them. I'll answer more questions as they arise, but I'll get back to why you're really here. While working on an oil rig, we were utilizing an ROV. Imagine a small remote control submarine. To do inspections, we'd been hired to inspect for structural damage or deficiencies after the rig had complained of abnormal vibrations. During operations, the ROVs are tended from a line that offers power, a strength member, and transfers video and sonar images back to topside. As the ROV descended into the darkness below, we began to notice thin scratches along the structure. At first, it was barely enough to rip the marine growth off of the metal, but as we got deeper, the scratches turned to gouges. As we descended even deeper, we began to notice that the scratches appeared deliberate. We pulled the ROV up close to inspect. There before us were images. There were hieroglyphics carved into the metal, and they were fresh. The deeper we got, the older the carvings appeared. They were corroded and partially covered in growth. Whatever was making these carvings was working its way up from the bottom. Then the ROV stopped responding. It began shaking back and forth. We lost power to it. We tried to pull it up by its tending line, but it seemed stuck. Then we felt it, tugging against the line, but it was coming from the ROV's side. Something was pulling it deeper. 2 more guys jumped onto the line and struggled to pull it back up. The line began creaking and parted. We pulled up the remainder of the line, but that ROV was gone forever. The supervisor was then left with the task of figuring out how to report our findings to the oil company. One incident took place about a year ago. During a salvage job, we were in the process of installing the rigging gear. While facing the ship with my back to the open ocean, I hadn't noticed anything approaching. Suddenly, something smashed into the tank on my back hard. I was slammed into the ship, flattened against it by the force. I turned around. There was nothing. I would later learn that I had several bruised ribs from the impact. After reporting to the other diver and topside, we were told they were going to pull us. We got back onto the stage and started being lifted toward the surface. We kept our eyes peeled, scanning into the not-too-distant shadows. During a decompression stop, we began seeing a shadowy figure circling around us. We continued to monitor it as it circled closer and closer. We began to see it more clearly. There was a massive shark circling us. Now I have never been afraid of sharks. But there's something about being circled by a massive shark in the middle of the ocean, dangling from a chain, that can instill a new phobia. in the bravest men. Keep in mind, we aren't in an enclosed cage, just a platform to stand on. It felt like being served on a platter. It eventually circled close enough to see its features, but I didn't recognize its species. It was bigger than a great white and with entirely different coloration. It was mostly black with a few gray features. It continued eyeing us as we sat there helpless, praying to be left alone. By the time we completed our decompression requirements, it was nearly close enough to touch. The stage lifted us up and out of the water, relieved that the shark had not decided to find out how we taste. On surface, we deduced that the shark had lunged at my back, but had only managed to hit the emergency gas supply cylinder. We did another dive, this time in crystal clear waters. And there's something nice about getting a job in waters where you can actually see your surroundings. The visibility was over 100 feet. We got to the bottom and began work. There were 2 missiles that had been ejected from a military aircraft and had not detonated. We were briefed on their location and told they were not armed and would not detonate, provided they were handled appropriately. We located them much easier than we expected and began preparing to rig them up. Just as I laid my hands on the first missile, my dive buddy said, "Oh shit," my stomach dropped. I don't care how many times you've worked with an ordnance, I sincerely believe you will always have that uncomfortable sensation in your gut and nervousness in the back of your mind. I looked up and realized he wasn't talking about the missile. He saw a wall of sand rising in the distance. Something, hopefully just the current, was kicking up the sand from the bottom of the ocean. The wall of sand was growing and was about 30 feet tall. Even worse, it was approaching us. Soon it was upon us. It's hard to describe what bad visibility does in the water. It's not a matter of not having enough light. It's a matter of too much crap in the water blocking the light. Imagine fog, but imagine, if you can, that this fog is thicker than anything you've ever witnessed. I'm talking about fog so thick that you could have a flashlight pointed at your eyes from an inch away, but you are completely blind to it. That's what bad visibility is in the water. The moment the sand hit us, we were engulfed in pure darkness. I placed my hand against my faceplate, but couldn't even see it. After a few moments, we began hearing a metallic scraping sound. Then, as swiftly as it arrived, the sand was gone. We had crystal clear waters again, except that there was no sign of the missiles. I had been within arm's reach when the wall of sand hit us, but now even feeling around under the sand revealed no trace of them. The next incident occurred during a humanitarian job that we volunteered to perform. After a portion of bridge collapsed over 50-foot deep ocean waters, we volunteered to recover the vehicles and hopefully the bodies. By the time we arrived on scene, the collapse had taken place just over a week ago. We spent the first day surveying the area and developing a plan to lift the most we could in the week time frame we had available. By the start of day 2, we were actively pulling vehicles off the bottom. It was a difficult job to say the least, but not because of the effort required. The state of disarray in the cars was heartbreaking. These weren't military pilots or sailors lost at sea. These were families on vacation or people commuting to work. It was hard to say what was harder. The cars where we found an entire family, with the parents' seatbelts unbuckled and them in the back seat having been trying to unbuckle their children, or the cars where the parents got out, leaving the children buckled in the back seat. I tried not to imagine the panic that had been going on inside the cars as they flooded from broken windshields or windows as people frantically tried to escape. But I couldn't forgive those that left their family to drown. Each day we moved on to a new section of cars, and on the 4th day we started noticing several of the cars had their doors open and nobody inside. We were happy to find easier work, especially under the assumption that the tragedy had been lessened by people escaping the wrecks. That is, until I began rigging a minivan for removal. The family inside hadn't been so lucky, As I ran slings through the van and prepared it be lifted, I noticed the other diver inspecting the rigging gear. He began undoing one of my shackles. I asked what he was doing, and the response was not what I'd hoped for. "I'm checking this truck for bodies." I felt the familiar sick in my gut sensation. Slowly, I crept over to the diver and turned his body toward me. It resisted, but slowly turned its face toward me. Its faceplate was fogged up, and I fought my better judgment. I leaned in close, and I wished to this day I hadn't. It was dark, but I could all too clearly make out the features. Rotting flesh. The person wearing this helmet had long since passed away. I lost my confidence, starting to scream. My comms were blazing. Divers and topside were frantically trying to get my attention. But I was focused on one thing only. I was scrambling backward, away from him. But I had fouled my umbilical around the rigging gear in my state of panic. The thing had again returned its focus to the minivan. As I frantically cleared myself from the slings, I noticed the telltale lack of bubbles coming from the helmet. It was opening the minivan door and reaching inside. As I swam away from the van, I watched it grab one of the passengers and drag them into the darkness. This was when I began to realize I might not be cut out for working beneath the seas. I continued diving for longer than I knew I should, the entire time the thought lingering in the back of my mind, I need to get a safer career. And with that, our final story comes to an end. Thank you so much for spending your time with me and watching till the very end. It truly means a lot. If you have any personal stories, strange encounters, or experiences you want to share, feel free to email them to me. I'd love to read them, and I'll definitely try to feature them in an upcoming video. And if you enjoyed today's stories, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Your support really motivates me to keep creating more content like this, and it genuinely helps our channel grow. Thank you again for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.